A special note to readers. The Night Henry Ford Met Santa is fiction, but it is based on things that really happened in Henry Ford's life. Henry Ford lived in Dearborn, Michigan at his Fairlane mansion until his death in 1947. Several years ago, while enjoying a guided tour of the mansion, I read Henry's words inscribed above the stairwell: "Whatever is desirable and right is never impossible." As I reflected on his words, I realized the magnitude of his many accomplishments. In many ways, the quote became the guiding idea for my story. I wanted to show that children can teach adults to dream, and that miracles can happen when love flows from an innocent heart and becomes the most unlikely source of inspiration. As I continued my tour, I got a sense that Christmas struck a tender chord with the Ford family. I learned that Henry and Clara created a Santa's workshop from a small cabin that was located on the grounds. For 30 years, Henry and Clara would host countless school children on a magical adventure to Santa's workshop during Christmas time, complete with a sleigh ride, jingle bell toys and reindeer, cows with antlers strapped onto their heads, and of course Santa. Occasionally, if you look closely, you would find Henry underneath the white beard. Edsel Ford really did write a letter to Santa when he was 8 years old, but he wrote it in 1901, not 1908. I used one line from Edsel's original letter and crafted the other details to match the ideas I wanted to convey in my story. Henry Ford built his first car, the quadricycle, in 1896, and his first Model T in September 1908, just before Christmas the same year of the story. The car was built at the Piquette plant, Ford's factory on Piquette Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. Until 1913, Ford manufactured his cars one at a time. Mechanics and craftsmen would gather at a central workstation and build one car from beginning to end. This was not very practical because it took a very long time. It was also very expensive. Each car cost $850, which was a lot of money in those days. Around 1913, Henry began to use a method of production known as the assembly line at his factory in Highland Park, Michigan. He had visited a meat packing plant in Chicago and noticed that an overhead trolley would pass the carcass to each butcher, who then carved specific cuts of meat as it passed by. He decided to try the process with his cars, but in reverse. Using a rope and chain, the car would move along to the next worker until it was fully assembled. After Henry introduced the conveyor belt, things moved faster and the price of the car was reduced to $260, which made it much more affordable. By 1927, 15 million Model T cars had been sold. Henry Ford did not invent the assembly line, but he was the first person to use the assembly line to make cars. His method is very similar to the way Santa's elves make train sets in my story. Did Henry Ford learn more about the assembly lines from Santa Claus or on a visit to the North Pole? Well, you'll just have to decide for yourself. I did my research for this story at the Benson Ford Research Center at the Henry Ford in Dearborn, Michigan. The museum had Edsel Ford's original letter to Santa and a lot of other interesting things too. If you ever get a chance, it's a wonderful place to visit. Or you can visit the museum online at www.thehenryford.com or .org. Henry Ford's estate, Fairlane, can be found online at www.henryfordestate.org. Carol Hagen. The end.